Welcome. Let's begin
Dr.
with the last
Manishika,
chapter
Jain.
for class 7 science. This chapter talks about the wastewater story. Now as we proceed further, we would understand the various types of impurities that are present when we are talking about the wastewater and what is the difference between sewer, sewerage and sewerage. Sewage is the waste that is flowing through the sewer pipelines. So sewer are basically the pipelines that are going and they are carrying this sewage. Now, very important to understand, when these sewer connect together and form a common line, this is known as a sewerage line, and that's a basic difference between a sewer, sewage and sewerage. Very important for this chapter, and we would be talking about lot more as we proceed. Now the first thing that we need to understand is what are the sources of wastewater that are there. Now wastewater could be generated through various means. It could be through washing utensils, mopping the floor, through bathing activities, through any other sweeping activities, through the routine agricultural inputs that are coming in. So all these sources, slowly and gradually, what happen is they drain in impurities into the systems, and this water ultimately is going through, which needs to be recycled or purified. So what we get or what we understand is the term potable water. Potable water is a water that is fit for drinking. Now when we say water that is fit for drinking, what does this signify? It signifies that this water is safe, it's devoid of any kind of contamination. If there is contamination that is present in the water, it can lead to waterborne diseases like cholera, typhoid, jaundice and so on. So in order to have access to safe drinking water, we need to have the treatment of the sewer that is going into the lines. Now if we look onto the UN statistics, around the globe you have 1 billion people who do not have access to safe drinking water. In line of conservation of water resources, 22nd March is celebrated as World Water Day. You have a decade of 2005 to 2015 which is considered as Water for Life, and the idea is to remove the pollutants. Now in this diagram, as you can see, you have the pollutants coming in from the industry as well as the household waste. They are being gathered and finally going into the filtration plant. Now what we as a common man can do is a separate thing, and what is done at the treatment plants is separate thing. So we'll be understanding both the aspects today, how as a common man we can understand about it and how we can work around the treatment of the sewage. So sewage, as we said, is the pollutant that goes through the sewer lines. Now when you have a sewer line that's growing, what would happen? Every 50 to 60 meters you would have manhole. Manhole, if you see on the roadside, you would have small circles that could be seen. These manholes are the locations where if there is any choking, any complication in the line, that could be treated. Now what is actually a sewage? Sewage is the wastewater flowing from the household, industry, mining unit, agriculture, and it has dissolved and suspended impurities in it. The most common impurities are organic impurities and inorganic impurities, and if not properly treated, it leads to odor, which leads to contamination, growth of bacteria, virus and protozoas in the water. Now organic impurity is mainly in the form of human feces, urea and the animal waste that is going into. When it comes to inorganic impurities, it's basically the nitrates, phosphates, metal compounds that are seen. When we talk about nutrients, this is basically derived from the fertilizers. So we have the NPK fertilizer, nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. Similarly, we have bacteria and protozoas. Now in the animal kingdom, which we would be understanding in the higher classes, we have different groups. So bacteria basically is a prokaryote and protozoa is a eukaryote. From bacteria you have diseases like cholera, typhoid. From protozoa you have diseases like dysentery. So you have microbes like protozoa which causes different diseases as compared to bacteria. So bacteria and protozoa we'd be understanding in detail in higher classes, but for now, for your understanding, the basic idea is the bacteria are at a very basic level, so they are in the prokaryote group, and they do not have a well defined nucleus. However, on the other hand, you have protozoas which are a part of eukaryote group, and the diseases caused by protozoa are dysentery, the diseases caused by bacteria are cholera and typhoid. So that's the basic difference at this stage that you should be aware of. Now when it comes to industries, you have industries that causes lots and lots of air pollution, but it's not only restricted to air pollution. The industrial waste flows in. Similarly, with the tourist activity, you would see disposal of cans, tin cans that is seen into the water lines or the water ecosystem, and that affects the water quality, bringing in impurities into the water. So idea is to treat the water that's coming in. Now what we actually desire is, in our houses, the water that's coming should be clean, but ultimately what's going from our houses is the impure water or the unclean water that needs to be treated. Now when it comes to treatment, we would be understanding this in various phases. The phase before the treatment, after the treatment. Now this procedure after the treatment, I could say, could be divided into two stages. It could be sedimentation or chlorination. In this diagram, as you can see, you have a water suspension that was there, and if you kept this stable for a while, you would see the impurities settle down. So this process is what is known as sedimentation. Other process that's really important is chlorination. Chlorination is much more useful where you are trying to disinfect the water, and this disinfection of the water is done through passing the chlorine into the water system, and in presence of sunlight you have the impurities that are removed. So that's again another process. So before the treatment we can say there are impurities, after the treatment we are trying to remove those impurities. Again, the wastewater treatment in the treatment plants goes under 4 stages. The first stage is you have large bars that are there that prevent bigger particles like tin, foil, cans, plastic containers to move out. So that's the first stage under which you are scrutinizing the material. The second stage is the water that's in a high motion is slowly and gradually the speed is reduced. As a result, the grit and the sand is basically settled down into the lower layers, and you have the upper part that is taken out. So you have the 2 stages of impurities that's removed. The first stage was very big pieces, very large containers that are seen. The second stage is the process basically of sedimentation. The third stage is scrutinizing the organic impurities. Now how this is done? This is done in 2 stages. In this diagram, as you can see, in the lower base what you would have a scraper that would basically remove all the human feces that is deposited at the bottom. However, on the top you would have floating impurities, and that's removed by skimmer. So 2 processes here. Scraper for the base and skimmer for the topmost impurities, and with the help of scraper and skimmer you are removing the impurities, and what ultimately you are getting is a clarified water. The impurities that are being removed goes to the biogas plant for generation of biogas. Now this is the first stage where you have the sludge separation that takes place. The next stage is really very interesting. So what we do is we push in oxygen into the water system. This pushing in of oxygen brings in the growth or increases the growth of microbes. Now as the growth of microbes increases, what would happen? These bacteria would start eating up the impurities that are present into the water, and this process is known as activated sludge, because sludge is a mixture of solid and liquid waste that is basically present, and activated sludge is where you have the microbial growth that has been activated, and it's basically being eaten up by the bacteria that are being generated through the process of aerator. In this process you would have 2 sludge that would be separated, the wet sludge and the dry sludge. The dry sludge is usually used for manure, compost material, and goes into the agricultural areas as organic supplement and nutrient. So this was on the side of the treatment plants. Now let's say what we as a common human being can do, or a common man can do. As a common man, we can look around and see in our neighborhood if there are no open drains, because if there are open drains, there would be flies, insects that would grow up. The growth of bacteria and protozoa will hasten, and as a result, what would happen is this would create a condition where there would be more waterborne diseases that could be seen, which could lead to even hospitalization. The other way around is planting trees. For example, a case study revealed that planting of eucalyptus trees around the lake body can basically help absorb the toxic material and release basically pure water into the systems. So that's one of the ways that we can do. Then, as we said, the impure water is one of the major source for waterborne diseases, which can even lead to hospitalization. Now, if you are using your kitchen sinks and you have the oil that's being drained in, what would happen? This draining of the oil into the sink would lead to choking, and as a result it could block your drainage systems, block your pipes. On the other hand, if you have paints, solvent that are sent into the main pipeline, what would happen is they would destroy the bacterial growth that is present. As a result, you would have the purification system that would be hampered. So those are some of the important things that we should keep into account. Swachh Bharat Abhiyan in India is one of an efforts in this direction to curb the amount of the waste that is being spread around. In the same line, you have the open defecation free program. Sikkim and Uttarakhand have really been doing well. Usage of dustbin have been improved across India. You have the dry waste and the wet waste that is being segregated at every stages. The wet waste can go for the compost and the manure process. Now, what could be the alternate arrangements? Creation of septic tanks where the sewerage systems or the sewerage lines or the sewerage networks are not there. You have isolated buildings, hospitals which are there. Byproduct of this waste treatment, if organic, can be used as manure or compost. Then coverage of the open drain. Low cost sanitation systems should be arranged. So septic tanks, vermicompost toilets, then you have chemical and composting pits. So those are some of the common examples that we talk about. A very good example here is the aeroplane, where you have the waste tank system that's there, and finally you have the impurities that are cleaned out. So that's one of the examples there. Vermicomposting toilets has been one of the major breakthrough in the recent decades. So with this we cover our recent chapter, the last chapter for class 7 science. We would be continuing the higher classes in the upcoming series. So stay tuned, do subscribe, have a wonderful time ahead.